Welcome to Readiness with Karl, and the question that we're looking at is, what is ego? So there's this term ego has been used in so many different ways, and what I'm going to be talking about is how I view it. And as you know, having been a human being and you go through your life, by the time you've reached adulthood, you've learned so many things. You've learned how to mobilize, you've learned how to speak, you've learned how to you have the spatial awareness, so you'll be able to be aware of, how far a distance is, what happens to an object when it goes around a corner, all these things to do with perceptual awareness, and also to do with conceptual awareness and thinking, and concepts which go from the idea of me to the idea of you, to conceptual stuff like the idea of the concept of a thought, or the concept of a cow, or all these categorizations that we learn. And so to me, what ego is that it is the culmination, it is the collection of all those automatic processes that you no longer have to do consciously because you've learnt them and now they're automatic. So you don't have to think about walking, you don't have to think about speaking, you don't have to think about the stuff that you just know it. And then when we go through life, we have this option that we can just really react automatically to absolutely everything that happens. And we can do that with minimal amount of metacognitive or prefrontal control. So what I'm saying there is this idea that you're about to react on automatic, and then you could make the decision to override that. Someone asks you, for example, what ice cream do you want? And your brain immediately thinks vanilla, but you choose to override that and go for chocolate. So that, to me, is the idea of what ego is. It is that culmination of all of those habitual responses and habitual concepts and ideas that you've learned. And fundamentally, in terms of readiness, this concept of readiness that I teach is the idea that the problematic parts of ego are not the walking, the talking, the knowing information, which is useful in everyday sense. Often it's the truth claims that we have stored in our brain. It's the core beliefs that we have stored. And examples of those core beliefs could be that, for example, we feel it's very important for a person to be successful. We, for example, believe that it's very important that a man be masculine. And as you can see, the examples of these core beliefs is absolutely endless, but they can be tied back, kind of painting in broad strokes, back to fundamental truth claims. And so for an example of a truth claim could be that there is a God, and that this God has spoken, has created laws. Another example is that there is another truth claim could be that there is no God, and that it is all driven by an evolutionary process. Another truth claim could be that the meaning of life is to have children. And you can see again that those truth claims are, again, never ending. And in readiness, it's not at all, we never are looking at trying to delineate which truth claims are true and which are not. And that's interesting because so many philosophies really are about that they're trying to argue for a specific version of reality. That's really not what readiness is about. What readiness is saying is that we can be aware that within the realm of the ego, which is this huge collection of automatic responses and learned behaviors and autopilot, if you want to think of it in that sense is that we always have the option to turn off the autopilot on any particular thing and switch into manual mode. And we can take control of the car and we can start driving. And that when we, as part of the learning that process, is that we have to start recognizing and paying attention to what the autopilot is doing. And so we can just observe. And the fundamental skill coming before observation is calmness, because you're not going to be able to just observe if you're not calm. You'll want to react. But if you can get calm and if you can observe, then you're able to look at the autopilot, which I'm saying here in answer to the question, what is ego? I'm saying the ego is this autopilot. And if you look at what the autopilot is doing, you can make discernments about whether it's doing things which are to your benefit or not. And specifically, we can look at those truth claims and those core beliefs. And why are they important? Because ultimately, it is those things which are the seeds which everything else sprouts from. So to explain that, if you get anxious, to tie it back to the examples I've given, let's say that you perceive yourself as a manly man, and then you wear something which you think is, which you perceive or you're worried is feminine. And if your truth claim is that a man must be masculine, and you take this risk or you do this thing, then you'll naturally feel anxious if you perceive that other people perceive that you have gone against that truth claim. Interestingly, other people may not care at all about that truth claim. But if you perceive that it is highly important to everyone else, then it will concern you. So what I'm trying to say is that for each person in their ego, they will subscribe to truth claims and to core beliefs, whatever they may be, and I'm not making judgment on any of those. Some are very helpful, some are not so helpful, and that always is in the realm of the person to decide. But at the end of the day, we all have these fixed core beliefs, and we believe these fixed truth claims, and then they get triggered by the things that our body senses, by the things that we see, and by the thoughts that we have. And so we can notice when we get triggered in the body and the mind and in speech and through the senses. And if we notice that, we can notice what the automatic pilot has done. We can say, oh, that's interesting. When I put on this hat, which my vision has registered as being feminine, it triggers and goes back into this core belief. And it requires a lot of ability to be self-reflective, to make these kind of connections. But with practice, we could. And it's quite advanced to get to that stage. But if you can draw it down and say, there's the core belief. And if you can understand what your ego's truth claims are and core beliefs are, then you're able to ask yourself, and this is called contemplation. You can ask yourself, do I think that this core belief is still valid? And then you're able to start making changes. And so what I've described here in a very broad way is how people can hop into manual. And it's an exceptionally difficult process that takes time to master and to learn, and that few people will do. And the purpose of Readiness is to allow people to be able to do this. And so just to finish off, I think now I've defined how I view ego, that it is this culmination of all of these different core beliefs, these fundamental truth claims that we have. But not only that, it's all of the habits and the reactive knee-jerk reactions that we have, many of which serve us very well. Like if we're about to drop something, we catch it before it falls, that we're able to walk without thinking about it. So most of it 99% of what you do is completely automatic. But what is always good to reserve is that there is that part of you which can pick manual, and that's where you have room to make changes. And within that small space to make changes is where you can redesign the automatic processes, where you can change the pattern, where you can have agency and you can have choice about what you believe and what you want things to look like. And also, through this process, although it's not very easy, it is able to some degree do what Carl Jung would have talked about, which is that idea of making the subconscious more conscious. Because your truth claims and your core beliefs, for a lot of people, they're not conscious. They don't realize that they're acting on those sorts of things. So if a person can do that process of being calm, of recognizing when they're triggered, when they're getting involved with, that's called maintaining the reaction, and then usually through identification. And then if they are able to look at the perpetuating factor, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about those fundamental core beliefs, then they're able to think about and contemplate, why is it that I react in this way? And if they can get to that fundamental core belief and understand it, and then are able to, in such a calm way, question whether this core belief actually serves them, then they have the freedom to change the bits that they want to change, whichever that may be. And so what they've done is they've taken the automatic, the subconscious, and they've made it conscious. And just like quitting smoking or whatever it is that a person might want to do, when you see that something is not to your benefit, it's not hard to give it up. So if I give you an example that if you take smoking, for example, if you just 100% know that smoking is killing you and that it's taking away your good looks, it's making you look older, it's taking away your health. If you can really see that in real time, it's a no-brainer to stop, because why wouldn't you? And it's the same thing that if you can actually get to that point where you can see your core beliefs and you see that they're not helping you, then it becomes much easier to change and have more agency over these and to create the change, I guess, that people often want. And when you're able to see them and make those changes and do it with agency, that is the freedom that so many people talk about when they talk about spiritual pursuits, or people talk about enlightenment and the freed mind and all of this sort of stuff. It's actually not much more complicated than that, although people like to make it sound magical. And of course, this process is not easy, because you only have the small amount that you can have manual control over, and only the small amount, because 99% of it's automatic. You only ever have so much that you can do, and you need to do it in a very consistent and organized way. But if you only have to identify the bits which are really problematic. Keep most of it. And I think this is the thing that often people misunderstand about trying to kill the ego, is they think they're going to kill the whole ego. You never are going to. I mean, we are completely conditioned. And there's this whole conversation about whether there is even free will, because if it's all automatic, how much free will do you have? But you can always choose to override. So you have the small amount of space, and it's maximizing and being able to use that space. So I'll finish there, but again, just to summarize, the ego to me is that collection of all of those learned behaviors, and specifically of interest to readiness is the idea that there are truth claims that we've stored and core beliefs that we've stored. And those are the things that tend to, for some people, cause us problems. And those are the things that we might manually want to change. So, thanks for joining us for today's little talk uh, here at Readiness with Karl, and I hope you can join me next time.